Hello, everyone. My name is Joanna Ball, and I'm Managing Director of DOAJ. And I'd like to extend a really warm welcome to the first of 3 webinars to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Directory of Open Access Journals. We're really delighted that so many of you are joining us for our first ever online global event. We have had over 600 registrations from 74 countries, and we are just so pleased to see such a wide geographical distribution of participants that really reflects DOAJ's global community. We know that you all have very different reasons for using DOAJ, whether you're researchers, librarians, publishers, research funders, but we know also that you are here today because you share in our values of open, global, and trusted. We want to make this event as accessible as possible, so please use the Zoom closed caption button at the bottom of your screen to turn that on. The captions are available in a number of languages. We'll also be making a transcript of the webinar available after the event in English, French, and Spanish. This is our programme for today, and I will shortly be handing over to Ebony Wickham, who will be moderating today's session, the first of our series of 3. But of course, we're here to celebrate 20 years of DOAJ. So I'd like to provide you with some highlights from our history. We were founded back in 2003 by Lars Biershauger at Lund University Libraries. And Mikael Laxå, one of our speakers today, in his article on the early history of open access, called this period the innovation years. And DOAJ was indeed one of those innovations, its purpose being to bring together and make discoverable the growing number of open access journals that were appearing. At its launch, DOAJ contained only 330 titles, but over the next few years, it began to be acknowledged as the primary index of open access journals. In many ways, the history of DOAJ reflects the history of the open access journal. The index has grown in line with the open access movement. And in 2013, with the increasing problems of questionable journal practices, or so-called predatory journals, we extended our evaluation criteria to ensure that only trusted journals were indexed. And we also asked all journals to reapply for indexing. That moment was really important in making DOAJ the trusted source that it is today. In 2016, we launched our ambassador program. Our ambassadors are open access advocates from around the world who raise awareness of the importance of open access and publishing standards. The program is still flourishing today with 26 individuals currently working with us, and the program has also been emulated by a number of other organisations. Today, DOAJ is the authoritative index of quality peer-reviewed open access journals, and is embedded in the community, increasingly used by funders and governments in their open access policies as a source of trusted journals. So that is a potted history of DOAJ. But as we celebrate 20 years of DOAJ as an open infrastructure, who are we and what are we today? Well, we are, of course, a unique and extensive index, probably the most diverse index of peer-reviewed open access journals. But we are also much more than that. We are an organisation with a broader mission and commitment to raise the reputation, the discoverability, and the impact of all open access journals. And we know that we play a really important role in opening up journal content from smaller publishers, from journals outside the global north, and from those that publish in languages other than English. Our organisation is formed of our dedicated core team of 28 and our wonderful volunteer network of well over 100 ambassadors and editorial experts, board members and council members from over 29 countries. Each journal that applies to DOAJ goes through a rigorous evaluation process by our team, matching it against our criteria. This means that our criteria are now seen as an unofficial gold standard in best publishing practice. And finally, of course, there's no charge for journals to apply to be indexed, and our metadata is freely available to the community. So here is our homepage as of last week, and you can see that that number of journals has really grown from 330 in 2003 to nearly 20,000, and I am sure that we are going to hit that 20,000 figure in our 20th year, which will be wonderful. You can also see the diversity in the range of journals that we index, both through the number of languages, the number of countries, and also that 2/3 of our journals, or the journals indexed in DOAJ, do not charge an APC. So let that dispel the myth that open access always means an APC. Now, to ensure that you are fully awake and engaged with our session before we move on to the main part, and we have a short poll for you where we'd like to test your knowledge about DOAJ. So you should see we've got only 3 questions, I should say. It's not going to take forever. You should see the first question appearing on your screen now. So please have a go at answering that. Do you know how many applications we receive each year? Given that we have 20,000, nearly 20,000 now in the index. I can't see how many people have answered that, but I think, Lachlan, we should probably move on to the results there. Great. And actually, I can see that not many people did get that right, because we receive about 8,000 applications for from new journals every year to be indexed in the DOAJ. And only about a quarter of those actually are accepted first time round. So let's move on to the second question. How many journals in DOAJ allow authors to retain their copyright? And of course, this is a really topical issue, given that so many institutions are moving towards policies that enable their authors to, or their researchers to, retain their rights. Okay, should we bring up the answers, or the responses at least? A little bit closer, but perhaps a little bit too optimistic, in that of last week, as of last week, we only had 56% of our journals which had an author retains all rights policy. And then to the final question, can DOAJ be bought or sold? And we hear lots on the professional and the sector blogs and press about different infrastructures that we think are open that do end up being acquired or being sold. So this is about that. Can DOAJ be bought or sold? And here comes the answer. Yes, nearly everybody got that right. That's really good news. So no, of course not. As a service of infrastructure services for open access, which is a UK community interest company, DOAJ cannot be bought or sold. So it will remain with the community. So now we have you fully warmed up. I'd like to let you know how you can engage with the session today. We'd like to make the session as interactive as possible and as much of a party atmosphere as possible. So please do ask questions to our moderator and to our speakers through the question box. Please do connect with the community in the chat. Go ahead and make comments and connect with each other there. We do ask, of course, that you are respectful of one another. And also do share your thoughts about the event on social media using the hashtag DOAJ at 20. So I'd now like to hand over directly to Abeni Wickham, founder of SciFree, who's going to manage the next part of the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone here helping us celebrate 20 years of being open with the Directory of Open Access Journals, or you might hear me call it DOAJ. I'm Abeni Wickham, as Joanna mentioned, and I'll be moderating the event. So today we have a panel of 3 people who are part of DOAJ's journey from the beginning to the new. Our first panelist is the reason why we're all here, actually. As the founder and managing director of DOAJ from 2003 to 2021, and as an advocate for open access over the years, he has co-founded the Directory of Open Access Repositories, the Directory of Open Access Books, and Think, Check, Submit. Please welcome Lars Bjørnhag. Our next panelist utilizes the open data from DOAJ. You can find his contributions to the study of scholarly communications in reports to the European Commission, the Harvard Library Offices of Scholarly Communication, the Ministry of Education in Finland, and much more. Please welcome Associate Professor in Information System Sciences from the Hanken School of Economics, Mikael Laakso. Our next panelist's work encompasses the creation of an umbrella university press services for publishing Caribbean history, cultural studies, literature as the former general manager of the University of West Indies Press. She's the senior lecturer at UWI, and you may also know her as the treasurer of the Association of Learned and Professional Society Publishing, ALPS. Please welcome Nadine Tulloch-Buckland. All right, Nadine? Yeah, all right. So let's get started. We're gonna start with you, Lars. Take us back to the beginning. Could you bring us to what sparked the beginning of DOAJ?
Yes, thank you so much. In the beginning of 2000, I was director at Lund University Libraries, and it was during those years that we saw the proliferation of big deal licensing with the big publishers. And of course, on the one hand, this was a delight for the student and researchers because they suddenly could access thousands and thousands of journals direct at their desk. On the other hand, we could see steadily rising expenses for the library. So it was a difficult situation. Then gradually I experienced that I was approached by former students from the university who now worked at spin-off companies at the science park at the university. And while they have been extremely happy with the service we were able to provide them at the university, they suddenly in their new environment experienced that they had not access to anything. Because as it were, I realized that we as librarians were put in a situation where we should prevent access to information for users. And that is, according to my view at least, contrary to the raison d'etre for libraries. So it was an awkward situation. And it so happened that it was during the same time that we saw the first discussions about open access. It was about, at the time when we had the Budapest Open Access Initiative in 22, founded in Budapest, and we planned a conference of scholarly communication in Lund later that year, and actually there were some of the founders of the Budapest Open Access Initiative present at that conference, and during the proceedings of the conference, the idea came up that we needed a list of open access journals. And it so happened that one of Michael's colleagues from the Hanken School of Economics was actually doing a project, and he provided a list of the famous 350 journals on an Excel file. So that was the start, and I volunteered to see to that we could produce such a list and maintain it. So we got a project, and we got initial funding from the Open Society Institute, and basically we then launched the service 6 months later, starting with those 300 journals and some very basic criteria. From the very outset, it was my ambition that this should not be just a new project. It should be a service. And of course, I'm happy today to see that we have managed to make it a service for 20 years. So that was more my personal background for coming into the open access movement. And yeah, the rest is history.
And we're grateful for that, because Mikhail, as someone who uses the open infrastructure data, could you tell us about your journey and contact, as Lars mentioned, and with DOAJ?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to join the celebrations here. I'm really honored. And yeah, so I think for most of my adult life, I've been very much in touch with DOAJ data in one way or another. It was in 2009 that I first downloaded the data set in collaboration with my then PhD supervisor, Professor Bo Christer Björk, who was earlier involved in collecting that initial data set that Lars mentioned. So, and ever since then, I've been hooked both on bibliometric research, hooked on understanding more about open science, open access, and throughout my academic career, I kind of just come back to the source because, of course, it keeps updating all the time, and it's a living database that you always have to consult again if you want to get a new snapshot of how quality open access publishing is doing. So most of my studies during my academic career have integrated DOAJ data in some part or another. And that, of course, also goes for all the other bibliometric scholars that are looking into this space, that very often DOAJ data is integrated in one way or another for the identification or filtering to open access journals. So it's really been instrumental for my own work.
That's wonderful. And Nadine, you've built a good collection of voices from the West Indies. What have been the guiding principles of your work going forward?
Thank you very much, Abena. And I just want to start off by saying congratulations to DOAJ. And we are newcomers to DOAJ, and we're just happy to be a part of this presentation today in this celebration. So we at the University of the West Indies Press wanted to make the UWI Press the umbrella organization for finding great research in open access and in other forms. And so began our journey towards getting open access journals be included under the umbrella called Journals of the Caribbean. And I began that process, I think, sometime in 2017. And we started, I think, with just one journal and have grown to about 10 now. And not all the journals are open access, but we're in a process, as I think our original presenter indicated, that, you know, the criteria for being included on DOAJ, you know, there are some strict criteria, and so we're trying to enforce those so that when the submission comes in, that will be accepted. So as newcomers, we're just pleased to be a part of this celebration and the organization itself.
That's really wonderful. So we're all here celebrating DOAJ and using it in different ways. But I wanted to speak to Mikhail and then Nadine a bit more about other languages. Both of you work in scholarly communication in multiple languages. Mikhail, can you speak about the access to work in other languages than English a little bit from your work?
Yeah, well, I think the open access movement, I know it's a very tricky concept since it's not just a singular movement, but in overall, like if we look at open access journal publishing, it has been a really strong proponent of multilingual content. And I think that diversity and that kind of heterogeneity among journals and between publishers is something that I think really should be treasured, that also the DOAJ works on kind of retaining, that by being a global operation, having these local ambassadors around the world that know the country and know the key players in them and are able to be closely in touch with the local communities, makes it possible to also include in indexing those journals that wouldn't perhaps or haven't yet been picked up by the broader and more Western focused commercial databases that we have. So I think both the open access journal movement and the DOAJ play on the strengths of each other in promoting this diversity. And I hope in the future that this could be retained, because of course with digital platforms, there might be this pressure for things to just move towards the average, or so to say that every journal looks the same and feels the same and is all in English. But I think with enough connective tissue, like infrastructures like the DOAJ, we can have that diversity and still have that content visible, connected, and available for everyone, independent on what language it's published in. So I think it's a really, really great thing that the DOAJ has played on the strengths of the diversity in this space.
Nadine, could you speak more on this, because you work with local languages with the different islands, French, Dutch, also Spanish. Can you talk about the growth of access to the work that you're seeing?
Right, thank you. So we had recently the opportunity to engage with the Caribbean Association of what do you call it? Caribbean Studies Association, pardon me. And in that association, they just had their annual meeting, and they celebrated the first journal, which is called Caribbean Conjuncture Caribbean Association Journal. And so that's the first project that we have worked on as a journal that included both the Dutch, the English, the Spanish and French contributions from within the region. And we're very pleased with the outcome. The organizers of the association is also very pleased with that as well, because part of what we're trying to do here is providing access. To us, access is almost like a KPI for us that we are just always striving to improve. And so part of that access also is, expanding our networks, to associations such as an indexing organizations such as DOJ, so that our content can be more widely accessible within languages that that provide what we call representation, within the region. We are what you call like a melting pot. There are so many, members from other cultures and stuff that are in the region. And so part of what we do is to try to ensure that everyone is represented, and it's represented in the first case in this journal as the beginning. And we're really, really pleased with that.
Lars, you must be also happy to hear about this. What do you think about this as a positive development? You've been with us for 20 years. How do you see this development with languages and more access to other content? What do you think about that?
Yeah, basically, I'm extremely proud of that part of DOAJ's services, because from the very outset, we have had a sort of inclusive approach, and we would like to promote other languages as well. And you can see that we, as of today, DOAJ has this journals published in more than 130 countries and accepting submissions from 80 languages. It has been a huge effort, but I think we have been extremely fortunate to be able to provide opportunities for librarians and professors and researchers around the world actually to donate a little bit of their time to contribute to a global movement. So I think it's a win-win situation for all parties here. And yeah, as of today, I think the OAJ is the most inclusive and diverse index on the global scene. So yeah, we're very happy about that. But it has been a struggle to enable us to do that.
But speaking about this being a struggle, like Nadine, coming back to you, what do you think we should be doing to where should we be placing our effort to make sure that this content in multi-languages can grow and be more appreciated from your side?
Was that a question to me?
For Nadine, sorry, for Nadine. Yeah.
Right. Can you just repeat that again, Abeni?
Sorry, I got too excited. I was wondering from your work that you're doing locally and you're seeing this grow, is there something that we can do as a community, as we're all here, to get this content to grow more and be more appreciated?
Absolutely. And I'm very glad that you asked that question, because sometimes as we are all moving towards open access, there are other journals that are available. I would love for persons to subscribe to it, to be familiar with it, to contribute to it. We know that we've had researchers from, all over the globe who have come to the Caribbean to do research. And so part of that is just ensuring that, there's a wide range of contributors. Basically, we are just ensuring, it doesn't matter who you are, that you have an interest within the region, and ensuring that the research within the region gets exposed as widely as possible. So I think part of it is creating opportunities, fellowships, grants, and supporting new initiatives like, SciFree, to make it accessible within the region as well, so that more persons can have access and contribute more to research in the Caribbean.
Mikhail, I'll throw this over to you too, because you work in Finnish and Swedish, maybe even Norwegian. What do you think we could place our efforts more there?
I think I really raise my hat to journals for example, in Scandinavia that are multilingual, so that they don't have to choose either or, like a national language or English, but they can mix them up so that authors can choose what they feel is the best medium for their content. And some journals even translate into the same article into multiple languages. And there I run out of hats for showing my appreciation and dedication to multilingualism. But I think definitely we should try to retain publication in these national languages, but there's also some small steps that can be done to facilitate just the discoverability, and so that people become aware of what's published in other languages, even though they might not immediately know the language, by having thinking in terms of preparing more simple to read machine translated summaries or in multiple languages, or having English abstracts to national language research and keywords that are translated and stuff like this, so that it isn't, even though it's not immediately accessible to someone, if it's interesting enough, there will be a way for that person still to find out that information, even though they don't know the language. So I think being published in a smaller language doesn't mean that it completely cut off from the visibility and discoverability, because we have pretty good tools now of trying to bridge that gap and so that people can find interesting content in many languages.
Yes, and of course, one of those tools is DOAJ, but then one of those tools are librarians who can help us to find different things, in the old way. But librarians' roles have changed. And Lars, you've seen that change over the years. Could you talk to the audience about how the roles of librarianship has changed, and how, with the DOAJ's movement and open access movement, do you see that changing over time as we go forward?
Yeah, I think the last maybe 3 decades really have proven that librarians can extend their roles in many ways within the universities, for instance, where libraries has often been the initiators of setting up repositories, for instance, and growing into research management, I would say, and data management and other issues. And of course, librarians and libraries has been the driving force in the whole open movement, I would say. And this has generated a raised profile for libraries and within their institutions that we haven't seen before, actually. And of course, in many places it has required again a struggle to be recognized that librarians are actually very skilled knowledge managers who can provide a difference for a university. So I think librarians has a lot to be proud of in terms of what has happened in the last 20 years in the movement towards open in a wider sense.
Yeah, and I'm also I'll put this back to Mikhail, because the librarian and the researcher, they pretty much actually work together. Mikhail, over the last couple of years, how have you seen that significant change in terms of the uptake and outputs for scholarly work change in open access and open science?
So I think one challenging part, connecting back to the libraries briefly, that they have always, of course, been strong promoters of open access and been the link between researchers and the world out there that is the rapidly developing open access landscape, so to say. So I think librarians have been very instrumental at creating awareness and spreading the good word about new interesting services like the DOAJ, for example. I think there's been many a workshop organized by a librarian showing, what the system can do and what's available. So that's great. And I still think librarians are in a key role to actually bring this slow but sure change to also the academic merit system. It's not something that librarians or even any stakeholder can influence on their own. But one problem with the slow change of acknowledging like publication in multiple languages or publishing more preprints or even just publishing open access, that would be valued and seen as important. I think librarians have been a really important voice in advocating for researchers that there is change to be done in the scholarly communication landscape, and the possibilities of digital don't have to be limited to what was possible on paper before. We can have more flexible scholarly communication. We can be more diverse and have different ways of working. So there's a super important link there, I think, between researchers and libraries for creating this muscle and movement so that the voices could be heard, because libraries are still sitting on the money for making agreements, for buying services. And of course, today I'm really glad that many libraries are supporting the DOAJ as well, so these open infrastructures. So it's really a complicated landscape, but throughout time, libraries have been, I think, central in enabling change, but they can't do it alone.
No, and I think that you brought up a really good point about the merit system and how the libraries can actually help affect change in that way. Nadine, the University of the West Indies is around many different campuses, so they have different libraries and things like that. And then you have the University of West Indies Press. How is that ecosystem working between the researchers and the library and their publishing wing for UE? And how has that changed over the years?
Okay, it's a great question. The University of the West Indies, and I'm located, just for clarity, I'm located in Kingston, Jamaica. That's the main offices of the University of the West Indies Press. And there's a library for every single campus of the University of the West Indies. So there's a library on the Mona campus called the Mona Library. There's a library in Barbados called the Cale Hill campus, and there's a library there. And there's also a library at the St. Augustine campus in Trinidad and Tobago. That ecosystem is served by this tiny press. So we try to ensure that there is synergy and that, there is what we call connection between these libraries so that we know the needs of faculty and researchers, and try to fill those gaps. Of course, we're a small press, so it's not us alone. There are other publishers in the field, other university presses that supply, the needs within the infrastructure. But as we know that libraries, have a unique position of interfacing with users, providing large digital collections, and basically operate as a hub, as a digital hub, for many researchers. And because we are so spread across various campuses and islands, that digital facility is very important. I think what we're seeing, and I'm making this point because I'm a part of the Association of University Presses, and I am seeing where many university presses have been merged and integrated within library systems. And we have not seen that yet within the Caribbean because we don't have a single, what we call, one library that covers all of the campuses in one location. And that's why the digital collection is very important, and the university libraries ensure as best as possible, given, budget constraints and all, that, a wide range of material is made available to the researchers and to students within the university as a whole. But there are opportunities for collaboration. We have done a couple of books with the libraries, and also the national libraries of the various islands. We've done partnerships with them as well, so that collaboration is continuing. And as we're focusing more on open access, we are seeking those funding opportunities that will make that even more possible, so that we can have the whatever the output of our collaboration can be made available to everyone. So that's what we've been doing so far. And I do see more of that happening. I think there's one point where we found a Sloan manuscript, and we were in partnership with the library to actually, develop a series of products for that great resource that we found. So lots of exciting things happening, and I'm sure others will be able to see all of these once we make the information more available.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that the library's roles have changed. There is support from the research community to bring that together, but even the physical space and distances they're coming together digitally in some way or form to move forward. Just to remind everyone here, please put your questions in the Q&A, and we're going to get to that actually quite shortly. Nadine, I want to pick up on something you talked about, budget and funding now. So there's no secret funding is important for our community and the work to not just start, but thrive. Funding can help us increase mass and velocity in open access and open science, but it can be a challenge. In your work, Nadine, how have you solved for funding, or how are you thinking about funding for the libraries and the press?
Okay, so you're touching on one of those points that are, very, very important to us. And I wear a financial hat for most of the time. And so this is the very important part of the publishing arm and making content accessible. I think what we're trying to do is to identify sources, excuse me, sources for which we can collaborate both with the library and the press, to provide, to produce content that we believe will be of mass importance, significant content that it's not just regional material that we believe that would be important to the global community. That being said, I believe maybe there's a case for open funding, if there's such a word. I believe that the various models that have been developed are probably more lean towards developing countries, because they do have the mass, they do have, the following of the the researchers and users that are much larger than, regional institutions like ourselves. But I think the key here is collaboration. In the same way that you do have, mentorship of some point, maybe there is something to be said about, having funding mentorship with some university presses and some institutions within this region where, in the interest of inclusivity, diversity, that we can integrate some of our regional research. And I think we have been doing some of that, but I think more needs to happen where that is concerned. At this point, though, I don't know that I do have a single solution for, our funding dilemma. I think we're all looking at it to identify what possible means that we can actually use to push the needle forward. And I think within the university context, the University of the West Indies, that is, I think we just need to come together more and to just utilize our resources in a more collective way. I think we can go much further. So I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking at seeking funding sources that will seek to integrate all of the UWI, the one UWI that we speak about, and to ensure that it's one universal institution, as it is so highly ranked on the Times Higher Education ranking system, within the Caribbean, just to be sure that we can do more, even with less.
Thank you so much. Mikhail, I see you nodding your head saying yes. Could you walk us through, in terms of, even as a researcher or as you engage with scholarly communication, how do you view the current funding structure in your work?
That's been a persistent challenge, but I think the road ahead looks much lighter than the road behind us when it comes to coming up with funding mechanisms that mean that institutions around the world can chip in to a common pool of money that then supports these critical open infrastructures. But to really get this into high gear, so to say, and really go where I'd want this movement to go, would mean that there should be a bit of pushback towards services that don't really serve the values that we would like scholarly communication and the science system to have, so that we could actually say no and be a bit harsher to service providers that do not kind of hold the future, but rather clinging to what we might see as past models and past values, and are stubborn to change their ways. So I hope that the movement could move from now sustaining to actually like funding these services to really prosper and really have all the resources needed to do all the great work that is to be done in this space. So I think it looks much better now, but I'd still like it to be even faster so that we could get to where we want to.
So faster it is, and much better, and upholding our values. Speaking of values and funding, Lars, do you see any possible solutions for funding that can help openness thrive? You're in the meat of the work and you've been around for 20 years helping. Do you see any way that we can solve this, or think of ways we can solve this funding challenge?
Oh yeah, if I had a promising answer to that, then I will not sit here. But I mean, as I said earlier, libraries has played a major role, and the various open access infrastructures has been supported mostly by libraries and library consortia. Now, I wish I could be just as optimistic as Michael, but of course we see some emerging things happen. But what I have been struggling with the last 15 years or so is the fact that it has been very difficult to attract substantial funding from those who are funding the research. I mean, they are funding research, but not the dissemination of research. If we go to Latin America, for instance, we will see that open access was invented there decades before we began to talk about open access in Western Europe, because over there, the research funders are funding research and dissemination. And the fact that research funders in Western Europe and USA and other places do not do that is actually the core of the mess that we are in, actually, because they have outsourced the dissemination of research to nowadays big corporate companies. And what I would see, and I hope Michael's optimism will prove right, is that if those research funders can change their priorities to support the good guys instead of supporting the other guys, we would see we could see a major boost in support for open infrastructures, services supporting diamond open access journals and data curation and so forth. So there are signs, but I would like to see research funders really let their actions follow their words, so to speak.
So basically, Lars, Mikhail is going to go out screaming, saying, you don't follow our values, no. And you're going to tell the funders, hello. And then Nadine and them are going to say, librarians connect, let's all go, like Avengers. So that's our plan.
Yeah, Benny, if I could just add to what Lars actually mentioned, and that's a very important point. And I think for small presses like ourselves, for those institutions that support the research and to some extent support the dissemination, but require that the content be posted on their site, it creates a problem for a small press like ours. So I would advocate for that the opportunity to make the content open access be made available to the publisher within the region to ensure that we get a slice of the cake, and there is a time frame for some of the publication to, I know DOJ's position is, immediate access, but I think we just have to look at it in terms of, will that eliminate some people? Will it eliminate some organizations? Small presses like ourselves, once the researcher go through and secure the research funding, if those large organizations maintain the dissemination, then it would squeeze university presses and small organizations like ourselves out. So it's important, I believe, to create a window of opportunity for organizations like ourselves, university presses, to make the content available as part of the disseminating train.
I really like that we're getting all the perspectives here about how difficult it is and how we should do this. But I feel the growing sense is that the passion is there and we're going to go out and get some money somehow. So I'm going to move over to our panel. I'm going to move over to the Q&A. I hope I don't know if you've been looking at it. So Sunita Parikh, actually, and maybe Mikhail will take this one, is asking what impact of AI tools like ChatGPT might have on libraries and scholarly communication. Would you take that, Mikhail, or?
I wish I could. This is not one of my research topics, so I know as much as anyone else in this space what generative text might mean. I assume AI here might mean, for example, like ChatGPT was mentioned here, that I myself don't see it as revolutionary, maybe as some other people. I think the birth of the internet and Googling any question and getting good answers, that was the revolution. This is an iteration on that you can actually, like money laundering, you can launder your text so that it's not uniquely identifiable to any other text likely on the web. So that's maybe the benefit there. But facts and references you could always look up on the internet. So it's not like knowledge that was locked in would now somehow be unlocked to the civilization. It's more about convenience and ease of access. So I may be more of a pessimist in other parts than open access growth and funding in most other parts of life, maybe. And this is one of those where I don't think this is yet a revolution, but I think it's definitely something that libraries need to be aware of, because of course they might be involved in information retrieval sessions for students, for giving these types of workshops, for example, for different faculty and students doing work, and to know where the line goes between just cleaning up your language to actually then plagiarizing and going a couple of steps too far. But I would maybe say that libraries aren't maybe the first I'm concerned about, but it's more like journals, that they should also be aware and really vigilant about seeing that they are aware of what current tools can do, and try to be, of course, read the papers that come in. That's of course that's a given for DOAJ journals, that they should actually look at the papers and see that every reference actually exists and every fact is a fact and not something else in the references. So it's a very complicated topic, and I think there could be many panel and workshop on this topic, but I think still the internet revolution was the real revolution. This is just making it easy for those that didn't bother to Google around before.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, I would agree with you 100%, Mikkel. Lars, did you want to add to that, or Nadine, would you like to add to that question? But then let's move on. Lars, this is one maybe for you, saying greetings. Camilo said, one question: what should DOAJ do in order not to become an instrument of the journals and publishers of the gold line of access? Maybe you should clarify like what DOAJ is and so on, but what should DOAJ do in order not to become an instrument of the journals and publishers of the gold line of open access?
Yeah, first of all, we are already here going into one of the terminological questions. What is the gold line of open access? But DOAJ has always been focusing on journals that only publishes open access, regardless whether it is associated with a payment for an APC or not. And what I can tell is that during the last 5 years at least, more efforts from DOAJ has been put into helping the smaller non-English language publishers to produce good journals and enable them and helping them to be listed. So I think we are moving together with other parts of the open access movement working on diamond open access journals to support those journals more and put them in a better place in the competition with the APC-based open access publishers.
Speaking of that, Nadine, maybe you can touch on this. Sivame asked, is APC a challenge for emerging developing countries? Could you speak on that, and then maybe Lars and Mikkel after?
Okay, sure. For now, it may not be that much of a challenge. In terms of what we have done within the institution is that the various benefits within the university. So for example, your book grant, your study and travel grant, these are all resources or benefits that persons can utilize for the payments of APCs to get published. But for institutions that may not have these benefits, yes, it would create some level of a challenge. And what we have found is that for contributors who required to pay an APC to publish within a journal, they are quite okay with doing that because they know that we're not a predatory journal. None of the journals that we have within our portfolio is, and so that that kind of gives them that reassurance. And we have been communicating within the region, that information that the journals that are predatory, that will not advance your career, that may harm you more than anything if you do assign to them. So the University of the West Indies Press have just been seeking to maintain that line. And I think Joanna Ball mentioned it in terms of the criteria And we have been aligning our own requirements along the same lines to ensure compliance and to ensure that, it's not a problem for individual contributors or so to pay the APCs. And we've also used opportunity to do funding within the region, institutional funding that support the output of the journal that would make the contributions a little bit less. That has been done as well. So we've been doing our part, but yes, maybe on a larger scale for some institutions it might be a bit of a challenge. But some of the fees, what I would say, internationally are significant. And so if you're thinking of putting out 4 journals for the year or 4 articles for the year and your budget is just that, then it requires some amount of consideration. So that's my take on it so far. Yeah.
Mikhail, would you like to comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, I can of course just say from my perspective as a researcher and some kind of activist in this space, I would hope individual article processing charges and this whole paying to publish, even though it might be baked into institutional agreements where a country or a national consortia pays a couple of million a year to prepay APCs, that's also a problem. It's not an optimal solution at all, and it's not. This is one of those models that doesn't maybe subscribe to the values that I would like, and I assume just scholarship, inclusive, equal scholarship would kind of subscribe to or would contain. So those can maybe be a middle step of flipping journals to open access and opening up the paywalls, but pretty rapidly we should already have been moving into some other models or some other ways of enabling equal participation, so that these individual payments wouldn't be muddled with like article acceptances and stuff like this, because it just creates a big global inequality and just a weird aftertaste to the whole system.
Lars, what do you think? Because I feel like this has changed a lot during your time, this APC movement and the increase of it and so on. What are you thinking about that?
Sorry, about what?
About APCs. The question, actually, I'm going to pull in another question that actually came directly to DOAJ. It said, what should we do in DOAJ to have an annual history of journals with consolidated payment data from APC that allows us to study the phenomenon of excessive charges from journals or publishers?
Oh, yeah. So that question, it falls into many of the requirements that we have received over the years to do sort of special things to extract knowledge of the things that we know about. But here we are talking about other things as well. And for me, at least, it has been very important not to create too much overhead in the DOAJ operations. So we have been able to focus on our core business, which is evaluating journals and put them in the journals. How they perform in terms of generating revenue from APCs is not really our business. It is interesting, but it's not a thing that we can afford. I don't think DOAJ will have or will ever have a research department. We have not funds. There are not funds available for that. I share many of Michael's view about the good and the bad things regarding APCs. But as I mentioned before, at least DOAJ, together with many other organizations, are trying to do more for support of journals going in the other direction, namely the Diamond Open Access.
Mikhail, would you like to comment? I mean, you do a lot of research into that data. Do you ever focus on this particular part of it from the DOAJ's data, or?
Yeah, of course, funding. I think Lars might a bit downplayed the important, just informative resource that the DOAJ data has, because it's, I guess, from the start, or at least whenever I became involved, it contained information about if a journal was free to publish in, and if it wasn't, there was a price tag, or at least some initial price for this article processing charge. So it's been a huge like help for just advancing the conversation, raising concerns, and seeing this phenomenon kind of roll out. So I think even though the focus hasn't never been on economic tracking, I think the open APC service that is on the web is the closest we have to tracking the millions and millions that are sent to different publishers. But I think the DOAJ has been just a great resource, not just for tracking the status of the open access journal publishing movement, but also a bit of what models seem to be prevalent. And of course, throughout time, the most prevalent model among the journals in the DOAJ have been these free diamond open access journals, so free for authors to publish in. But of course, the problem is that most of the articles are published in journals that ask for an APC fee, so they are then on average larger and more commercial in nature. So it's they are two different worlds, I would almost say, in these logics that they operate around. So, but really fascinating to watch, but also concerning, because it would be nice to have an even stronger shift towards this free for authors to publish in.
Yeah, especially with the new European Commission language that is coming out now about free to author and so on. And I want to pull this question over to Nadine from Dana, who said, should a higher education institution consider establishing an open access journal in a specific field, particularly in a developing country? And then I will pull this over back to Lars for the second part. What do you think about this, Nadine? Should they have, as a press, their own open access journal as an institution?
And I think my short answer is yes, for some reasons. And I think it may relate to if there's not a current journal that speaks to the topic and the research and the subject area that you are actually looking for. And I think seems hardly likely, but I want to say that just to ensure that we are in the mix of providing open access content is part of the reason why we would want to be a part. I think our perspective is also important. We want to bring that to the world. It may not be the same as in with other territories. So as a higher education publisher within this region, we want to bring the perspective that we have on the various subject matters to the rest of the world, so that it can inform and help us in making better decisions as we seek to be more equitable. I think that's a very important point. But I think historically what we have done, and researchers from within the region, it's published within journals that are well established. Faculties will do that to ensure that they get the various credentials, for promotion and tenure, to have your work being published in these journals. And as a small press, we're just 30 years old. We have started our own beginnings by collaborating with those who are established in the various fields, within the, I think, 16 academic disciplines that we're a part of. So yes, I still think we do. If there isn't space for our perspective, it's important for us to have the voice of the research being presented through our university press. Yes.
Lars, Dana also asked in that same question, is there any support for institutions making their own open access journals, or is this something DOAJ can get involved in?
I think DOJ provides a lot of information on the website as to how to set up a proper journal in terms of licenses, copyright issues, and other things. But that, of course, is on a more general level. And then, of course, DOAJ has its network of ambassadors and even volunteers that could be consulted. But I think my advice to such an institution here would be to connect to other similar institutions in their own country or in a specific subject, because the problem is not that there are not enough journals. The problem is that there are too many journals. So I think it's very important that that you establish a collaboration on these issues, so to create maybe larger journals or pool your resources that way. Thank you.
That's great, actually, because we just saw the news maybe 2 weeks ago in the Nordics, where the universities, Stockholm universities, and a few others are collaborating in their open access book publications as a way to mitigate costs, but also bring content to a wider audience. Mikhail, there's a question here about, is it difficult to get funders for social sciences across the globe in comparison to other disciplines? Could you have some thoughts about that? Is it that BME, biomedical engineering, gets funders more engaged than the social sciences? What do you think?
Well, I may be connecting this maybe incorrectly, but to back to the connection to this article processing charges, that basically it's harder to get funding because it is more uncommon to have large research grants and ongoing large research grants in the social sciences and humanities compared to the STEM field, where it's more common to have this larger scale operation. And in that case, it doesn't really burn that much to get invoices of a couple of thousand euros or dollars every month. But when you don't have that funding and it's not part of this infrastructural production almost that some of these labs might be more accustomed to in the STEM fields, of course, it's a huge problem. And that's one of the challenges of APC, is that it's very difficult. It would mean that every institution would have to set aside some pool of money that would have to be kind of distributed on some weird criteria then of what is a good enough journal or what is a good enough publication to warrant what type of fee. And, it's a whole rabbit hole of different then competition for this fund, because of course it's not endless. The point is still to use that money smartly, because there's not enough probably in that pool anyway. So yes, no, please, no more APC journals. We should figure out better ways to provide this back-end infrastructural funding to keep the messy business of funding backstage and have the academic work and its merits compete rather than the money and the scarcity of it.
Yeah, and on that, actually, Dr. Avik Roy wrote, collaborative research outputs should be, especially which are government funded, in open access platforms. So we're getting rid of the word journals, for promoting further research, right? Because they're collaborative. But he thinks this has become a daydream. What is your opinion, Lars? Oh, we can't hear.
Sorry, I didn't get that question.
So Dr. Roy says that he thinks that even though we say all research should be open and things like that, it seems that it's become a daydream. Even though it's government funded, it should be open for everyone. He wants to know, what do you think? Are we still dreaming, or is it possible?
I think we have actually made fantastic progress towards thinking and acting on open. When we started 20 years ago, we were ridiculed because we talked about open access to information. But nowadays, you cannot find a pro-vice chancellor or university rector or a research funder manager who is against open. But there's, of course, a lot of flavors of open, but as I think I have said earlier, we have won the argument so massively, but there's still some roadblocks coming up all the time, but we are on track. We are not daydreaming. We are moving in the right direction, definitely.
And a good example maybe is Nadine and your journals and your open access journals. Could you talk a bit on this? Like, it's no longer a dream, you're actually pushing it forward at UE.
Yes, that's one of our initiatives that we have been advocating for. And this, I think, should be university-wide. Why? We want everything coming under one umbrella. We don't want persons trying to find in which department this person is doing an open access journal. It should be under one umbrella. And you're looking for it within the Caribbean region, you should look for it under the University of the West Indies Press, Journals of the Caribbean. Why? Because we are ensuring that the criteria are met. We are ensuring that the editorial committees are complying with the various standards, even under COPE. All of those requirements, we are ensuring that it's there, and to maintain the quality of the output, to go against any reporting of misconduct or anything. We have it under all of this one umbrella where it is properly managed and peer reviewed, and the persons governing the journals in terms of its administration, its editorial committee or editorial board, whichever it is, is very rigorous in their deliberation. So I believe that it's important, and you can find our content is made available at UWI. www.uwipress.com, and I think this is a wonderful conversation. And again, congratulations to DOAJ on its accomplishment, 20 years. And I thank Lars for highlighting just what he had to go through, the ridicule. And we all, when we start anything new, we go through all of that, where we don't have supporters, but we do it anyway. Because in the end, we will find supporters and we will get moving and we will find a way. And I think we have done that. And congratulations again to DOAJ.
Yes, thank you both, Nadine and Lars. The person who posed that question, Dr. Roy, said you're absolutely right. There's still some roadblocks in this scenario. So thank you for highlighting that. So I'm just going to take the last question now. And everyone here, DOAJ has kindly said that if we haven't answered all your questions, they will provide a blog post or so after where DOAJ and the team and the panel can answer your questions forthright. Thomas asked you, Mikhail, especially earlier, that there's actually not one OA movement, but plural movements. There are those that think that we should move beyond journals, since the journal paradigm is what created the prestige economy in the first place. Journals should be replaced by decentralized platform publishing, according to this thought. How do you perceive this goal, Mikhail?
I'm familiar with this thought. It's a thought that has come up, I think, for many decades, kind of rethinking the system, that if we would build scholarly communication today, would we go this route? Would it look like it does today? Well, probably not, but I still think journals serve a very important community glue function, and since journals have very well-defined, usually, scopes and ongoing narratives and history of particular research streams being key to specific journals, I think it would be hard for many disciplines probably to recreate that same thing if we would just go Wikipedia on it and not really have those community aspects. And I think my solution rather would be that we could all use a common IT infrastructure. It wouldn't matter that much. We can use the same plumbing and the same, reinforced steel in our houses. No one would be the wiser, but we can do our own customizations and twists to it and still have the benefit of this customization to specific academic needs and communities, while still having a modern infrastructure that is interconnected just as a large platform, just without the dystopian facelessness and this, machinery-like platform thinking. So I'm maybe old school in that way, that I think we can just kind of modernize a bit the IT infrastructure behind journals, and it all the time it gets more and more mature and advanced, so that we can create these basically global windows into scholarly communication in different fields, just like a portal or platform. But I wouldn't go that way to make it the only and primary way of conducting and making research available, to just force researchers to just be on one or a couple of big platforms. I don't think we're really there yet, though who knows, in 200 years I might be the one laughing or crying. Well, I might be wrong. I don't know how the expression goes, but my face would be red at that point, should I be around.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I actually thank you for all these great questions. They were really lovely. And Mikkel, I want to hold you as we close off. And, given all the questions and what we discussed today, what are you seeing for our future in open infrastructure and content? Not this dystopian, but what are you seeing moving forward?
I'm really happy that open access, just as it's been diverse in like maintaining and facilitating multilingual publishing and local publishing traditions and moving them over to digital, I also welcome any type of experimentation, and that's with scholarly communication. I think open access has been a key also to that open access journals have often been the ones that have rolled out open peer review experiments or permanent open peer review, for example, or integrated preprint early sharing of content while it's in review, and these types of things, or these new models where articles are submitted to a common pool within a discipline. This is like platform-like, and then if accepted by reviewers, are then picked up by journals who kind of bid on the accepted manuscript that they want to publish it, and it's up for the author to choose where it gets published. So all of these experimentations usually include some flavor of open access, and I think I'd like that experimentation to continue. We should keep challenging the assumptions, but still not forgetting what is key, the essentials of just thorough peer review and making sure that whoever accesses scholarly materials on the web would clearly be aware of what type of material they are looking at, be it just some, an early preprint, or then a peer review report, or the finished manuscript, or a retraction, or something. As we mess around in this space, we should still be diligent about really being always transparent and clear, just as the DOAJ in its criteria, so that there is always a clarity in what type of content we're looking at. So that's my 2 or multiple cents.
Wonderful. So the criteria from DOAJ gives us a springboard to innovate. Nadine, the future is looking really bright for access to work in the Caribbean. What are you most looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to having that one platform that actually provide all of this content within the press. As a starting point for a regional institution. I've been linking with the Latin American Association there, and I'm seeing, as Lars have highlighted, that they have been doing open access for a long time, and so we are taking some cues from them. We have actually engaged with them with some rights and permission issues since they have that there, but for us, it's having that institutional platform that is accessible to everyone. Open should mean open, yes, but there's a price tag to it. And we want to ensure that, we have the relevant support to making it open, making our research open. But there is some, as Mikkel would say, leave the research to the forefront and leave us finance people and administrators to sort out the innards as to what it's going to cost and how it is we're going to put it there. But for now, I think the challenges are real. But we want to be sure that the research is being put forward, and for everything authentically Caribbean, it's the University of the West Indies Press. Thank you.
Wonderful. Lars, DOAJ has become instrumental over the years. Now, as you're going to hand the ball over to Joanna Ball, what are you most proud of these last 20 years of DOAJ?
A lot of things, actually, that we so quickly could transform a project into a service that has run now for 20 years, and that we have been able to respond to the changing demands of the community by changing criteria and develop DOAJ accordingly. And we have been able to secure funding for that organic growth. And of course, being able to recruit and keep a brilliant team. And I'm personally very proud that I've been able to transition my leadership to a new leadership that is extremely promising. So yeah, that is some of the things I'm very proud of. I'm proud of as well that DOAJ have had this influence on the whole open access movement. Yeah, it has been a wonderful journey, and we will win at the end.
That's the way to say it. Thank you so much to our panelists, Mikhail, Nadine, Lars. Thank you so much to all of you for your questions and comments, and to everyone from DOAJ. Dom was in the chat helping you. Thank you so much. We come from various backgrounds in our work today, but we can confidently look back at the last 20 years of progress to see how the journey of creating DOAJ has made a positive impact for researchers, libraries, and publishers. From access to multiple language and content to all sitting with you today. We see that funding is truly important for openness, but the passion we all collectively share will ensure that that work from all over the globe will be freely accessible no matter what. We will keep the momentum going. But please don't let this conversation stop here. DOAJ will be releasing stories on their website and social media about individual and collective journeys in open access. But I invite you to keep this conversation going over a cup of tea or coffee with your colleagues, friends, and others in the ecosystem about what it truly means to you about being open. Thank you so much for your time and being with us today, and have a great open access journey. Over to you, Joanna.
Wow, thank you, Albania. That was probably one of the most energetic examples I've seen of moderating, particularly online. So a massive thank you to you for chairing a really interesting discussion, and of course to Albania, to Mike, Lars, and Nadine as well for a really interesting discussion. Lots of issues brought up there. Just a couple of reflections from me. There were lots of conversations around DOAJ being a connective tissue, about collaboration and working together, and the need to move together to the next stage. So to work together in some of these collaborative projects around supporting institutional publishing, supporting new models of open access publishing, so that we can achieve a kind of more equitable version of open access. So there's lots of work for us to do. I was also really taken by Lars's pride in what he's achieved throughout DOAJ's history, and also that DOAJ is a community effort, and you could see that today with the members of the team chipping in the chat. And I know a lot of the team are listening in, and we really are a proud team and a very proud community, and DOAJ is that community effort. And absolutely, open, as Lars said, open is here. It's here to stay. There are some roadblocks, but together I'm sure we will overcome them. And I also wanted to thank our fantastic audience and participants. It's been amazing to see the amount of energy and buzz in the chat, the questions coming in, the discussions, and I just had a look at the where you're all from, and it is an amazingly diverse group of people. So thank you for really carrying the party atmosphere on. But before we end today's session, I'd like to remind you that DOAJ is a non-profit, community-led infrastructure, and we are completely reliant on contributions from the community to carry out our work. to maintain and develop our system and our platform, and to carry out that rigorous and manual process of journal evaluation that we've been hearing about. And I'd like to thank our fantastic community of libraries, publishers, institutions, data users, funders who enable DOAJ to carry out our work. So if you aren't a supporter and you make use of our services, perhaps as a librarian recommending DOAJ in your LibGuides or making our metadata available to your users via your discovery system, or your research data, using our data as your research data, or using DOAJ to find articles for your research, or you're a funder using DOAJ in your open access policy, then please support us so that we can continue what we're doing, and we can continue to keep our data and core services free and deal with the increasing number of journals that are applying as open becomes the default. So in terms of how to support us, there are different options. Please have a look at our web pages. And you're also very welcome to make a contribution to DOAJ via PayPal. Please save the date for the remaining 2 webinars in our series. So that's Global on the 28th of September and Trusted on the 7th of December. And look out for more information on these via social media and our DOAJ at 20 mailing list. Thank you to our 3 event sponsors, without whom we wouldn't have been able to hold our webinar series, and they are Crossref, EBSCO, and the Royal Society of Chemistry, and we're really grateful for their support of DOAJ as an open infrastructure. Before the session, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, but before the session started, Mikael said that this combined 2 of his favourite things, DOAJ and partying. So what's not to love about that? And it's been a really fantastic atmosphere throughout the session. So thank you to our speakers, and thank you to everybody who has worked so hard behind the scenes to make this event happen. So Kat and Dom and the team from Event Hub. And to all of you, our participants today, for joining in our celebrations and engaging in the discussions. Thank you. Goodbye.